Hey, what's up everyone? My name is Greg and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you exactly how to build an epoxy cutting board. In my case, I'm going to build this project for one of our corporate clients and they're going to use this as wall art. And they specifically asked me to build this project for them as a handover gift. And the concept is basically the same to build an epoxy cutting board. So the live edge slab I bought is called jacaranda wood, and most of the preparation on this slab is already done. I bought this slab from one of our suppliers, it's already kiln dried, and all the bark has already been removed. And we're going to start off by cutting our live edge to size. And as you can see, my live edge slab is resting on the mold, and the mold is already cut to its final size. Now I'm just busy marking all the loose ends on my live edge slab I want to cut off. At this stage, I'm not too worried about cutting my workpiece 100% square, because later on I am going to cut it to its final size. Moving on to the next step, we need to build a mold where we can cast our epoxy in. And I'm going to use white melamine board. And as you can see, I'm using a nail gun to fasten my sides to my bottom mold. Now you can use screws, I'm just finding a nail gun is making my work go much faster. Now I know I did say the mold is already cut to its final size, but in fact the mold I made about 5mm bigger on all the sides. This is so that I just can cut my board to its final size when it's dry. Now I'm just going to apply some silicone in the edges of my mold. This is just because so that when you're going to cast to epoxy, it's not going to leak out. Now I'm not too worried about making this a nice smooth finish because I am going to cut my workpiece to its final size later on. We don't want our epoxy to stick to our mold, and as you can see I'm using an anti-release wax agent on the inside of my mold, and this is going to help prevent my epoxy from sticking to my mold. Now once you apply the wax, you need to wait about 10 to 15 minutes before you can come and wipe it off with a clean cloth. Now I'm going to insert my live edge slab into my mold and it's fitting like a glove. Moving on to the next step, you need to make sure your work surface is 100% level. Once you have your workpiece level, we need to calculate exactly the amount of epoxy we're going to use for this project. Now there is a few methods of calculating the amount of epoxy we're going to use. You can obviously use rice, apply it in all the areas you're going to use epoxy, remove the rice and calculate the volume of rice, and that's going to give you the amount of epoxy you're going to need. But this is a very small project, so in my case I'm just using a basic length times width times height calculation. So once you know the amount of liters you're going to use for this project, you need to convert your liters into kilograms. And then from your kilograms, you can work out the amount of resin and hardener you're going to use for this project. Now my client specifically asked that we can use a bright orange for this project. And I'm just adding a few drops in my epoxy. And I honestly do have to say the color came out quite sick. When I mix my epoxy, I mix it for about 3 to 5 minutes and make sure you get all the corners and the sides. And you can leave it for about 10 minutes and you will see all the air bubbles is gonna start to rise up. And you can just use your gas torch to remove all the air bubbles. For this project I'm not going to use a deep casting epoxy. I'm using an epoxy where you can pour 10 to 15 millimeters at a time. Now this is a question I get a lot. Why am I not using deep casting epoxy? And the answer is quite simple. The epoxy I'm using, where I need to cast 3 to 4 layers at a time over a period of 2 days. Deep casting epoxy is 4 times the price of the epoxy I'm using in this video. And I'm obviously not going to pay 4 times the price for a product that's going to give me the same quality. And that's the answer. Simple and easy. When I finished casting my first layer, I waited about 10 to 15 minutes and you'll see all the air bubbles is busy coming up. And you can just use your gas gun to remove all the air bubbles. The specific epoxy I'm using, I need to wait between 4 to 8 hours and then I can come and cast my next layer. Using the same method, you need to wait about 10 to 15 minutes. All the air bubbles will come up and you can just pop them with your gas gun. The specific epoxy I'm using, I need to wait about 5 days before I can start working with my workpiece. And this is basically how it came out, and I gave it a period of 4.5 days and my epoxy was 100% dry. Now you can see when I'm removing the cutting board from my mold, it's coming out quite easy. This is due to the wax I used on the inside of my mold. So at this stage of the project, I am extremely happy with how it's coming out so far. Still a lot of prep work to do before we get to the final product. Now I'm just putting the cutting board on a CNC machine to make it flat on top and at the bottom. So my cutting board is 100% level on both sides. Now you can use a router sled, but I found that a CNC machine is much faster and it's saving me much more time. After flattening of the slab, I did give the board to one of our suppliers that's doing engravings, and they engraved specific sentences and words our client wanted on the board. Having the board back at my shop, I'm going to router all my edges on top and at the bottom, giving it a 45-degree chamfer right around. So my client specifically requested that we apply a black epoxy in all the wording we engraved on the epoxy board. And I'm just using as a wrench to apply the epoxy in all the wording. They say you learn something new every day. And I'm going to share with you what I have learned on this project and something I will implicate in all my future epoxy work I'm going to work with. As you can see, the epoxy I'm applying into all the letters are basically overlapping the letter. That's because obviously I am going to come back later on when it's dry, and the plan is to sand it down so you can only see the letter and obviously not the overlapping of the epoxy. So this is what I've learned, is that the epoxy I'm applying to my work surface, the epoxy is penetrating into the wood and that's discoloring the wood. So when I'm going to sand my complete work surface, the wording and letters is going to have a smoky black around all the letters. And I did go back afterwards and apply a coat of epoxy straight through my work surface with a scraper, so my wood surface can be the same color right around. I did see Blacktail Studio and Black Forest Company using the same method. They basically covering their complete work surface with epoxy, and now I can actually understand why. This is definitely something I'm going to use for all my future projects, especially when it comes to filling of cracks and just closing all the imperfections of your workpiece. Moving on to one of the final steps, and that's by sanding all the excess epoxy down so I can just see my words and letters. And we're going to start off with 80 grit sandpaper, and then we're going to move all the way up to about 400 sandpaper. And then I'm going to finish it off with 500 sandpaper. The bottom of my workpiece I only left to about 220 grit sandpaper, and that's going to give the smoky look at the bottom of my cutting board. So my sanding is basically done. Now I'm going to oil my workpiece, and for this project I'm going to use Odie's oil. This is the first time I'm using this product, and I honestly do have to say this is one of the best smelling oils I've ever worked with. I would put this under my nose and smell it the whole day. I will obviously do a full review on the Odie's oil, maybe compare it with Rubio Monocoat, all the pros and cons, and I'll give you some feedback later on. I did, however, do a video on the current oils I'm using. I will leave a link now and you can go and check it out. Now guys, before you go, make sure you support the channel by subscribing, liking this video and hitting the notification button. This is honestly going to help me to produce future content. Thanks guys, enjoy this one. See you next week.